What's going on, everybody? So, Chapter 10. Chapter 10 is all about the antebellum South. And antebellum in the United States with a capital A means before the war, antebellum. So, before the war, meaning before the Civil War. So, it's the period of the American period from 1789 to 1860 for the most part, right? So, let's talk about antebellum. Now, slavery, big deal, right? Big deal in the early colonies, and we go through tobacco farming, Virginia, that kind of thing, right? Tobacco, indigo, and rice. Now you get a situation where it becomes it starts to slow down. It wanes. The book uses the word wane, and wane means to go down. So slavery, the numbers of slaves and everything starts to go down because tobacco is a big deal, but not that big of a deal. Right around the time of independence, right? But guess what? Cotton. King Cotton explodes. And King Cotton not only explodes in the old states of the Delawares, the Virginias, the Carolinas, and that kind of deal. Well, as you go west and south, Florida, great for cotton. Texas, fantastic for cotton. Matter of fact, in a few weeks, they're going to play this football game called the Cotton Bowl. And it's always hard for me to watch because I know what that represented. It represented a market where they sold cotton off of slave labor, and we still have that to this day. So Texas, Tennessee, Kentucky, all these places become big, giant slave areas, Alabama, Mississippi, because of King Cotton, okay? And so slavery actually is on the rise. Now, why is it on the rise? The reason it's on the rise is because you can export cotton. And you're thinking, so what? Export cotton, make money. Yeah, of course, make money. That's the whole point. And you need slaves to do it. And you're saying, but Aaron, I heard that Eli Whitney created this thing called a cotton gin, and it was supposed to make it easier. Yeah, it made it easier. Therefore, you got more production. Because you got more production, you needed more slaves. So slavery actually goes on the rise in the early, I'm still here, in the early 1800s, all right? So in the early 1800s, there's a big push, and the big push is set up by the Industrial Revolution and the need for cotton. So all those dudes in the North talking about, oh, we don't like slavery and all that. Well, guess what? They were using slave labor to make their money because what would happen is the cotton would go up north, be produced in the textiles and sent to the rest of the world sometimes. A lot of times it would just go straight from the South as cotton to England and other places. But the factories to make actual textiles, to make actual clothing, like this kind of stuff, was in the North. So everybody who says the North was against slavery, not necessarily, because financially they were benefiting. So get that right. Always remember that part. All right? Now, what else ends up happening is that if the South is all about producing cotton and doing things based on farming, they stay very rural. They stay very agricultural. They stay very village based. It's just my farm, my slaves, my cotton. Well, if the North is all about becoming more industrial, it's my factory, my town, my city. And so the North becomes urban. And when you become urban, you attract immigrants and you attract different thoughts and ideas. And look, we ain't going to Gilroy tomorrow because Gilroy is a sleepy farming town. We don't want to be there. But guess what? If we were in the city, just think about it. We call we call San Francisco the city. It's the center. It's the hub, right? So imagine SF being the city and a place like Gilroy, a place like Fresno, a place like Bakersfield being the South. We're just different in our ideas and our thoughts, politically, everything. A place like the Castro wouldn't survive in Bakersfield. It just doesn't work. It's the same thing. So I don't want you to think of the North and South as just slave and not slave, rural versus urban. I want you to think about the different thoughts and ideas and the level of progression and the way we see each other is very stark and very different, okay? Now, let's talk about being a slave. I know it's hard for some of us. And I know that especially for my black students, this is real hard because a lot of times in our class, the only time we talk about black people is in a sense of struggle. I get it. I understand it. I am from Africa. I understand. But it has to be talked about. We have to be able to figure it out, right? So what we want to talk about is 55% of the slaves, man, worked with cotton, right? About 20 on tobacco, and like 10% with rice and sugar and hemp, and then 15% or so worked in domestic servants, and the last 10% did mining and construction, right? Domestic servants are house slaves, light skinned people, usually the results of slave masters raping black women. Yeah, we'll move on from that. Okay? So what ends up happening is that when you're a slave, usually you just have to work really, really hard all day. Early in the morning, I hate to smile about it, but you get up early in the morning, you work hard all day. And there was like a different bunch of levels to slavery. Remember we watched the movie, we watched a clip of Roots, and we saw that there was a slave who was in charge of beating the other slaves, right? Almost like an overseer type, right? Watching everything out. He was trusted by the whites. Then you had, the character, the older gentleman who was in charge of making sure that Kunta Kinte and some of the newer slaves knew their role, and he could actually even speak to the master and things of that nature, and had a pretty decent level of education, had some good words with them, right? Had some nice vocabulary. And then you had people like Kunta who were just straight up field slaves. And then you saw the light-skinned servant ladies in the house. So there's all these different levels of slavery. It is very difficult. Now, what you want to think about is this. With slavery, there weren't a lot of people coming in from Africa so much anymore. It was just a lot of internal slavery, meaning that the slave trade was buying and selling slaves in the United States, all right? And so there's this thing called sold down the river. And what would happen is that you would have a situation where these new states, Texas and Arkansas and all these places, needed slaves. And to get these slaves, and like you said, there wasn't a lot coming in from Africa, you would actually split up families. So you would, as a slave owner, sell your slaves downriver. When you sell them downriver, that means going down the Mississippi and going down to what we would call the New South, the Arkansas of the world, the Alabamas of the world, the Mississippis of the world. All right, and so that's what happened. And a lot of people call it the Second Middle Passage because obviously the Middle Passage is across the Atlantic. This Middle Passage is down the Mississippi River. All right. So not all slaves were doing like hard field work all the time. There were some very skilled slaves, and what ended up happening is that these skilled slaves, and it was usually men more than women due to traditional gender roles. They were able to do skilled work. They were able to do situations where they would be clockmakers and things like that. They'd fix things. There'll be jewelers. There'll be blacksmiths. And it doesn't sound super skilled today, but those are super skilled jobs. And they did all that, especially because the South cannot attract immigrants to do that kind of work. Remember, almost immigrants are going to go north, right? And let's talk about a couple of things. With slavery, you have this thing called cradle to the grave. You are a slave from day one to the day you die. Period. There's no getting out of it. And I know there's a lot of talking of like, oh, he bought himself out of slavery. That's like a 0.1% kind of thing. It didn't happen. You're born a slave, you die a slave. Cradle to grave slavery. In addition to that, when you think of being a slave, there's also this thing called the one drop rule. So it's not about I'm mixed and I have white family. No, you don't have any of that, dog. If you got one drop of black blood in you, you're a slave, and that's how it works. It's called the one drop rule in the United States. All right. Now, also, there was no legal recognition of slave marriages. Let's make sure we understand that. All right. Now, what happened is this. People would jump the broom, right? Unofficial things, they're not legal. But the reason why the slave owners were okay with it or actually encourage slave marriage is that, hey, it keeps people more docile. It keeps issues from flaring up. If everybody is just free to have sex with everybody else or anything like that, it becomes a system where there's a lack of control. But if you know that this man and this woman say that they're married and they have children, not only are they going to be more easy to control because you can say, well, I will harm your children or I will harm your wife because of whatever thing I want to do, and you can use that as a negotiation tool, you're also in a position where you're getting more slaves. If people get married and have sex and have families, you're going to get more slaves. It's like your chickens having sex. I hate to say it like that. It's just what it is. And so slave owners were okay with that type of situation, right? Another thing is a situation of play family. I don't know if Latinos do it the way black folks do it, but I know all my black kids that I ever taught, we had a situation where somebody's your cousin, but it's really not. Somebody's your sister, but it's really not, right? I hear it all the time. I hear it. I hear people yelling, brother, sister, this, and that, and it's not really truthful family. It's called an extended kinship network. But the reason why blacks have an extended kinship network in this world today, and the reason why they had it back in those days, is because you can get sold. You as a black father knew that one day you can be sold. Therefore, you had to make sure that your children had fathers and uncles and all these people everywhere, right? And also create a system where that all black people were your family in some capacity because you were all related in the sense of being slaves. And so the black family is a big deal. And it wasn't necessarily based on blood. It was just based on skin. We're blacks, so we're the same, and we're family. And so that's a big thing. Another situation was African American religion. The book is going to ask you about like how, what are some of the things that brought black people together and like kept the systems tight. And the systems are going to be obviously the kinship network that we just talked about, but also the church, the African American religion, black religion, right? And it was one of those things where you could take Christian religion and take the teachings of that Christian God and all the things about hope. Think about it. It says the meek shall inherit the earth. What the hell else was more meek than a slave getting his ass beat all the time, you know? So you're in a situation where the meek will inherit the earth. And so slaves come together through religion. Also, the Second Great Awakening, remember talking about the First Great Awakening? It brought Christianity up in the north. The Second Great Awakening brings Christianity to the south and to the slaves. And there's more connection to it, right? And then another thing was that the owners really felt that Christianity will make slaves more docile, more calm, more willing to accept certain things. And to a certain extent, that's true because Christianity promises a lot of great things, but a lot of those great things are in the next life. And so as an owner, you can tell your slave, and they can be Christian, and they can believe that this is their lot in this life, and then they can be free later on. So Christianity, you would think, would lead to rebellion, but it really didn't. It kind of just calmed you down a little bit, right? Right? And it was really about surviving. Christianity is about a religion of surviving. Think about Jesus Christ. I mean, you know, if you want to go that way, his birthday's coming up, right? And how did Jesus Christ die? Jesus Christ died upon the cross. Jesus Christ died for the sins. He was a martyr. Well, every slave is a martyr. And so it was really weird that the owners would push, not weird, but that the slaves would even attach themselves to Christianity because it's almost a situation of acceptance. Christianity is a religion of acceptance, of enabling, of surviving. And so that's what happens. That's how blacks stay tight, and the black church is still a thing. We call it the black church. So you think about black kinship groups and black families in the black church. And then even later on, as we read, don't you remember how we have a situation with people like Martin Luther King, and a lot of the leaders in the civil rights movement were based through the church. He was a reverend. He was a doctor because he has a doctorate in theology. So it's religion that pushes these people deeply, right? All right, let's talk about this. Let's talk about slave revolts. Hey, slave revolts. Slaves are not just going to be kicking it all the time. Let's talk about a couple of them and make them real quick and make them real good. Nat Turner's Rebellion, 1831. It didn't work. Close, but didn't work. Right? Gabriel's rebellion, Denmark Vesey's plot, where they were prime examples of a string of organized slave rebellions that shook the South, right? And what happened was that the South was always arguing about like slavery was a good thing for blacks and that it was a benevolent institution that helps blacks out. Now, when you have these revolts happen, the North looks at that and says, these slaves don't like being slaves. They out here killing y'all for that, right? And the only way that these slave revolts can be stopped was through force. And so, no, these particular revolts did not work necessarily to give freedom to these black men and women, but it did give an opinion. It gave a voice to that cause, right? And so that was the positive. Abolitionists in the North saw that and said, no, we have to do something about this. But the negative of it is that they created stricter slave codes. And so there was a situation where even if you were a free black person, you were pushed against these very strict laws and codes because of the threat of you rebelling against your master. Right? Okay. Let's dispel a myth real quick, man. Everybody likes to talk about how, think about how everybody in the South was a slave owner. Man, to own a couple of slaves, man, would mean like you own like a $100,000 car in today's society. You just don't own slaves left and right like that. It just doesn't happen. So let's make sure we understand that. The people who owned slaves were like the top 5% of the society. They just had all the money. And the vast majority of the population was basic middle class white farmers just trying to get along, maybe one slave, no slaves, just trying to get through their day. And then there was a big chunk of people who were poor white trash. And poor white trash in the South were actually worse off than slaves, because as a slave, push come to shove, you had a guaranteed job and you could eat. If you're poor white trash, you don't have any guaranteed work. You don't own any land. You have no guaranteed work. You don't know if you're going to eat. So have you ever understood? Now can you understand why poor whites and blacks don't get along? Because you would think they would have the same cause, right? But no. What happens is this. Blacks, slaves, even free blacks, have these restrictions against them. You can't go here. You can't marry this person. You can't do this. Boom. That bring them down socially. These whites, even though they don't have money, they're down here on the money scale. They're up here socially because they can get married. They can go to school. They have this hope and these options. And they have someone to look down upon. So for all of you people who are like, I can't believe this person voted for George W. Bush. I can't believe this person voted for Donald Trump or any other rich Republican. It's because of race. And it's because of the system that's set up here. Poor white trash can look down upon blacks. All right? So remember, the top 5% of the population are your rich planters. You have a chunk in the middle called the yeoman farmers who own their own land, and they're pretty just middle class. Then you have poor white trash, then you have slaves. And you don't have a big immigrant population in the South at all, of any capacity. And that's pretty much it. You just have a situation where after these slave rebellions and things like that, you're going to have you're going to have it harder to become a slave owner. After these revolts, like we talk about Denmark Vesey and Nat Turner, you're going to have to spend more money to own slaves. You're going to have more money to be in a situation where you can make sure that they're safe and taken care of. That's pretty much it. Yeah. All right. And remember, even though the slavery system is becoming more expensive and becoming more difficult to keep up, the South still clings to it. Remember Fitzhugh and defense of slavery and all that kind of stuff? There's this defense of the system. All right? That's pretty much it. Boom, boom.